In a snowbound Minnesota mall, shopper Nora explores after closing. The blizzard had hit without warning, a furious white wall that descended upon the suburban sprawl of Bloomington, trapping the last few stragglers inside the Crystal Palace Mall. Nora, who had only ducked in to grab a last-minute gift, found herself among the stranded. Security had done a sweep, guiding everyone to a designated waiting area near the food court. But Nora, ever the contrarian, the mall was a relic of the late 90s, all polished brass railings, teal-colored tile, and a massive vaulted glass ceiling now completely obscured by a thick blanket of snow. The only light came from the emergency fixtures and the individual store displays, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed in the periphery of her vision. Nora's boots made soft, shuffling sounds on the polished floor, the only proof she wasn't a ghost herself, haunting this consumerist cathedral. She drifted past shuttered storefronts, peering through the metal grates at the silent, ordered worlds within. Bookstores with spines neatly aligned, jewelry shops where faux diamonds glittered under focused spotlights, and clothing stores populated by their silent, plastic inhabitants. It was the clothing stores that began to unnerve her. The mannequins, usually just a part of the background scenery, seemed different in the oppressive silence. They stood in their designated poses, frozen mid-stride or in unnatural contortions of high fashion. But there was an intensity to their stillness. Nora paused in front of Eclat, a high-end boutique she could never afford. A line of female mannequins, all with identical featureless faces and stark white skin, were arranged in a tableau. One, dressed in a crimson evening gown, had its head tilted at an angle that seemed just slightly too sharp, its blank gaze fixed on a point just over Nora's shoulder. She felt a prickle of unease, the distinct, irrational sensation of being watched. Shaking her head, she dismissed it as a trick of the low light and her own overactive imagination. She continued her walk, the sound of her own breathing suddenly loud in her ears. As she passed a sportswear shop, Velocity, a faint sound made her stop dead. It was a whisper, dry and raspy, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It was so faint she thought it might have been the wind, but it had a distinctly vocal quality. She held her breath, straining to hear. There it was again, a sibilant hiss that seemed to snake out from between the metal grates. She squinted, her eyes tracing the line of athletic mannequins poised in dynamic, frozen motion. One, lunging forward with a basketball, its plastic muscles bunched, seemed to be the source. The whisper coiled in the air, barely audible but chillingly clear. 50% off? Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. That was impossible. It had to be a stray radio signal, a glitch in the mall's PA system. She took a half step back, her eyes wide, scanning the silent figures. They hadn't moved. Of course, they hadn't. They were just plastic and fiberglass. Yet as she stared, she could have sworn the mannequin with the basketball had shifted its weight, its head turning a millimeter in her direction. Her logical mind fought a rising tide of panic. It was a projection, a simple manifestation of her growing anxiety in this strange, isolated environment. She forced herself to take a deep, steadying breath and turned away, quickening her pace. She would head back to the food court, back to the comforting presence of other people. The illusion of safety was better than this creeping, solitary dread. Her path took her through the mall's grand central atrium, where a multi-tiered fountain lay dormant, and the main department store, Westwood's, loomed like a fortress. Its security grates were only half lowered, an oversight in the hasty lockdown. An invitation. Against her better judgment, curiosity overriding fear, Nora ducked underneath. The air inside was colder, tinged with the scent of perfume samples and new textiles. This was the heart of the mall, a labyrinth of departments. Housewares, cosmetics, menswear, and women's wear. The silence in here was heavier, more profound. The emergency lights were fewer and farther between, creating vast pools of impenetrable darkness. And there were mannequins everywhere, hundreds of them. They stood on platforms, grouped in simulated social circles, and lined the aisles, their blank, aristocratic faces staring into the gloom. She moved deeper into the store, navigating by the faint glow of her phone screen. A whisper slithered out from a display of men's suits. Impeccable tailoring. It was a dead voice, flat and emotionless, like a recording played at the wrong speed. Nora flinched, spinning around, but the figures were perfectly still, their dark, painted-on eyes vacant. She hurried on, her boots now thudding in a panicked rhythm. From the cosmetics counter, another whisper, this one feminine and breathy. For a flawless finish. She glanced over to see a disembodied mannequin head, adorned with a pearl necklace, its glossy red lips seeming to curl into a grotesque smile. They were all around her, a chorus of ghostly advertisements. Limited time only. Unbeatable value. Your new signature scent? The voices overlapped, a cacophony of dead sales pitches that seemed to emanate from the very air, from the plastic throats of the silent army that surrounded her. Panic finally took hold. Nora broke into a run, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She careened through the aisles, knocking over a rack of scarves that fluttered to the ground like dying birds. The whispers followed her, growing in volume, a relentless, disembodied drone of commerce. Must have for the season. Final reduction. She needed to get out. Out of the store, out of the mall, out into the clean, cold fury of the storm. She saw the exit, the half-lowered gate, a promise of escape. She was almost there, her lungs burning, when a figure stepped out from behind a pillar directly in her path. It was a mannequin, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress. Unlike the others, it moved. Not with the fluidity of a person, but with a stiff, terrifying grace, its joints making soft clicking sounds. It raised a smooth, white hand, its fingers impossibly long and slender. Nora skidded to a halt, a scream catching in her throat. The mannequin's featureless face was inches from hers, and when it spoke, the voice was no longer a whisper. It was clear, sonorous, and filled the cavernous space. A voice of final, absolute authority. It resonated not in her ears, but deep within her bones. Its plastic fingers, cold as marble, closed around her arm in a grip of unbreakable strength. "Buy one," it said, its dead voice a chilling parody of a friendly sales clerk. "Get one eternal free." The scream finally tore from Nora's lips. She thrashed, pulling against the mannequin's grip, but it was like trying to move a statue. Its grasp was unyielding, its blank face a terrifying mask of calm possession. With a final, desperate wrench, she twisted free, the fabric of her coat sleeve tearing with a loud rip. She didn't look back. She scrambled under the gate and sprinted through the atrium, the mannequin's offer echoing in the vast empty space behind her. The whispers seemed to fade as she fled, or perhaps they were simply drowned out by the blood pounding in her ears. She burst through the main entrance doors, shoving them open with all her might, and stumbled out into the blizzard. The wind was a physical blow, a solid wall of ice and snow that stole her breath and bit at her exposed skin. The world was a maelstrom of white. The parking lot buried. The cars transformed into anonymous, snow-covered humps. She fought her way through the deepening drifts, her only guide the faint, intermittent pulse of the lot's emergency beacons. She fumbled in her pocket, her frozen fingers barely able to work the buttons on her key fob. A pair of headlights flashed weakly in the distance. Her car, relief, so powerful it was nauseating, washed over her. She slogged toward the light, her legs heavy, her body screaming with a cold that was more than just physical. The blizzard was a chaotic, howling entity, but it was a natural one. It was real. Whatever was in that mall was not. She finally reached the driver's side door, her hand shaking so violently she could barely fit the key in the lock. She yanked the door open and threw herself inside, slamming it shut and locking it, sealing herself off from the storm and the horrors of the mall. She sat for a long moment, her chest heaving, her forehead pressed against a freezing steering wheel. She was safe. Shivering, she finally lifted her head, her gaze drifting to the driver's side window. The glass was a dark, reflective mirror, swirls of snow racing across its surface. It took a second for her brain to process the reflection. It wasn't her own face staring back. It wasn't her fear-stricken eyes, her wind-chapped skin, her messy, snow-dusted hair. The reflection was smooth, perfect, and featureless. It was stark white, with a serene, empty expression and a glossy, painted-on hairstyle. Outside, the blizzard howled its fury, but inside the car, all was silent. Her car window showed her as a mannequin, posed forever in the display.